I've been asked to introduce Sandow Birk, a celebrated artist who works in a wide variety of media, from painting and sculpture to paper and prints, from public art and video to books, installation, and even puppetry, and whose practice my gallery, Catherine Clark Gallery, has represented for nearly 30 years. I'm also honored to introduce Robert Mailer Anderson, a remarkable artist, writer, filmmaker, collector, activist, philanthropist, and a lover of music, expressed, for example, through his support of SF Jazz and Los Sensoteles. So he's a veritable and accomplished polymath. These two creatives, who are both fathers, are evidently well-matched to be in conversation with one another and to share their experiences of collaboration.
So it's funny, we were talking earlier, because we do talk. So Sandow, we've been friends for a while. And we've been drinking buddies for a while as well. And so it's interesting to speak of collaboration, because I think that when I think of collaboration, I'm going to put this into, I'm going to play interviewer here. We're going to put this into Sandow's court. As an artist, a fine artist, writing, how has writing influenced your work?
Coming into tonight, I had sort of thought that I've done like 3 projects where I've worked with books and done pictures for them. I was the Divine Comedy and the American Quran and the Oscar Wilde book that I did here with Arion Press. And the first one I did 20 years ago was taking on the Divine Comedy, sort of naively attempting to do pictures that went along with them, and I always, it was a successful project that took about 5 years, but I was always really hesitant about when people called them illustrations, because when I stumbled on Dante and started reading about Dante and learning about Dante and then deciding to do a project about Dante, I knew that, he's been around for 600 years. There's been hundreds and hundreds of adaptations and translations, and artists for centuries have done pictures for his story. And so I came to the Divine Comedy, and I thought, I don't need to illustrate this. It's already been done. And I thought, I really love the poem. I really like the imagery. I really want to use it as a vehicle to make pictures that comment about life in contemporary times. And I didn't need to illustrate his pictures. And on a super simple level, not being a religious person, I was like, I don't believe that there even is a heaven or a hell or an afterlife or anything. And
not even circles of hell? If there's no God, we'd have to create him, but there's certainly circles of hell, and there's people that we should put in them. I'm throwing that out there as a fellow sort of atheist.
But I felt really free to make pictures that contradicted the story. So whereas the story in the Divine Comedy is Dante's telling you how he went to hell and went to heaven and came back, and this is what he saw, the pictures that I did show that he's never actually gone to heaven or hell. He's just walking around in American City, and his whole story is like in his head. So the pictures are like contradicting the story that the text is telling. So I always thought they're not really illustrations, they're not pictures of what the text is telling you. The pictures are like a different story running parallel to what the text is telling you.
So then how did someone, say, living like, say, Robert Mailer Anderson interact as opposed to, say, Dante, being on the same level artistically? And then
when we came to do a project together, you mean?
Well, I guess facetiously I'm asking you, so he's dead, I'm alive, right? Mostly. And so when we collaborated, just to be clear, I think it's really interesting. The idea of collaboration, we were talking about this earlier on the side, we've done a lot of different things together. And some of it has to do, in my end, where it's possibly a legitimate 50-50 collaboration, where we're both have an idea or something, and we, through collaboration, make it better than the sum total of its parts, right?
That would be the SF Jazz murals I would think of.
That's super kind, but yeah, something like that. Or then we have other things that would be more where our collaborations with Elise too, by the way, who's in no small measure in the mural project for sure, and should chime in whenever she wants me to be quiet, which would be smart. We've also had points where I had a text written at times, or was working on a text. So then it becomes more input sometimes, I think, from myself, because it's funny to just to go there, because we've worked through a lot of stuff, right? And some of it will be like the posters that you see. And so that's kind of, on my end, it's not really collaboration, it's art direction. That's a kind of a collaboration. But I've also done collaborations with screenplays, where you're sitting next to somebody and you're choosing the next words. I don't think fiction can happen that way. I'm surprised when people say they collaborate about that. You collaborate on film, you got 160 people, right, with different jobs. That's a collaboration, right, in a big movable circus. But what we've often done is varying degrees of, so first of all, I love Sandow's work. I'm talking too long, but I've been in awe of Sandow's work for a super long time. I knew his work prior, and he's the Raphael Michelangelo of our day, by far. To give myself any credence, to share that collaboration is also to have him cover a lot of my ground for me. It's amazing to see what he comes up with in the same direction that I believe. They did a piece called American Procession, which was the 50 worst people in the world and the 50 best people, which was so much harder to come up with, because people are flawed, as it would happen. And so I'm pretty good at lists and ideas, and I think my fictional mind works to what resonates in a particular manner. So I helped them with the lists of the people, and then argued for them, as people know that I'm an arguer. So 50 people is tough, and it's an interesting thing to make lists. One of the things Sandow does that's incredible, I mean, he can speak for this in terms of the frame, right? So we're around the frame, but is the minutia, and especially with his work, I tend to think more is more sometimes. And so I think one of the things I've helped with is resonant minutia in the things that we've collaborated with. And when you show me a drawing, or you show me ideas, right? I usually respond with
put something more in it. Robert and I have collaborated. Usually our collaborations are, he calls me and he says, can you do me a movie poster tomorrow? I need it by tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And maybe I can get you one more day. Can you do me a record album design? Can you do me pictures for, those are for your Winters on the World movie? Always immediately, always as fast as you can. But it works because when it has a short period of time, you take what comes. There's not time to fix it. Whatever I come up with, that's going to be good enough because it's due tomorrow. And
Well, again, it's really interesting when you try to collaborate with people that have a similar worldview and you love their work. So everything that he's ever delivered me has been exceptional, if not fantastic. So that's going to happen. So then you're just trying to work within that kind of framework, and then possibly enhance you and the work that you're doing as you go along. I mean, the Teddy Ballgame thing, I think, was Sandow. I was the fiction editor for 2-3 years for my uncle's newspaper. So once a month, we were doing fiction issues, and I was in charge of editing and picking the fiction, and then Sandow would do an illustration. And during that time, I was like, well, I just want to hear what you think for the most part. And you learn the craft of the space of doing kind of political cartooning in a way for that space. But I was way more interested in what Sandow did, and I don't think I commented that much, a rarity for myself. But when it came to doing as I was writing and doing a play, or as I was writing and creating a novel, I had more to say. I was like, no. Which is, and again, I think that's interesting in a way. What happens when you when you collaborate with people who have like visions, what happens with you? I mean, Dante had a vision, the Quran has a vision, like not to put ourselves in that, but other people that you've done, Long Beach has a vision.
Yeah, well, I've always felt like I did the Dante project and I did the Quran. These are like ancient texts, so I felt that I could stray from them and impose my own ideas on them. So like in Dante, I could show that it's a secular world, not a divine world. Or in the Quran, I could show that even, these ideas of how to be a good person in the world could be depicted in everyday life in American cities. So it's like a secular version of Islam or something.
Right.
And then when you came to me and did the Teddy ball game, then many people have said, "Oh, I must have been really into comic books when I was a kid," and I never really liked comic books. I didn't read them very much, and I always found them I was just never into them. And then when you came to me and said, "Could I do sort of a comic book version of your play script?" It was really a challenge, and that was really fun to actually hear, like you said, I want it to be in this specific cafe, and I want it to look like this, and then, so that was a whole new challenge for me. And then
He knew it right away too. When I got the first ping back, I was like, oh fuck, because I jock coffee at Cafe Trieste here in San Francisco. I had an espresso bar. I lived in a welfare hotel, like SRO, for a couple of years. I was finishing my novel, and I was jocking coffee at Cafe Trieste. So I set this play, The End of the World. These guys come down. There's like, a couple 100,000 people left, maybe in California. Everything bad's happened. Anyway, and when I got the first picture back of the setting, I was like, he captured Cafe Trieste, which is Cafe Dante in the play, but he had it down to the minutia. And you said you'd only been in there a couple times, and I didn't know that. I don't think I gave that to you as a reference point.
I've been in there. I mean, I knew.
Did I tell you that's where?
Is North Beach?
Yeah, but did I tell you that's where it was sort of set? I thought I was holding that card close.
No, I think it was pretty clear. But it was really fun and challenging, except you only gave me 7 hours to do the whole thing. No, it was about 7 days.
Well, each one actually came out in, I think it was monthly at that point, right? So we gave you a little lag time, maybe. And I remember with the fiction piece, the only thing that ever still quibbling about was one of the main characters of a fiction piece, where I was still just like, eh. But back to here in San Francisco, one of the things that we did work on with Elise as well was the SF Jazz murals. And so those of you who don't know, in the SF Jazz Center, it's the first standalone building for jazz in America, right here in San Francisco. There's 3 incredible murals. One is called Jazz in the Afterlife. One is Jazz in the City, which chronicles the jazz history of San Francisco. And then the other one is Jazz in America?
Yeah.
Jazz in the USA? Jazz in the USA. This is a little punchier. And so that was very interesting because I was on the line for those being good, underwriting those, trying to find someone to help underwrite those, public spaces. I noticed that, of course, Kara Walker has done a piece for the Arion Press. I had talked to Jason Moran about how to get a Kara Walker piece in, and very, very difficult to, in timely manner, do stuff. And Sandow always up for anything, at least the same way. And so we started in on these things. One of the things that hit me, probably too late, which was kind of funny, which was, oh fuck, he does satire. Like a lot of the things he does, but it's satirical. There's nothing satirical about the two. I don't think there's no satire really involved. Darkly comic in ways, I think, maybe. That's a stretch, but it's not satire. So that was I was like, oh my, we're stretching this cat way out of his comfort zone, and what are we gonna do? The Jazz in the Afterlife, I don't remember having too many comments about, which is a wonderful mural where people you want to describe it, but people are ascending to heaven really happy, and only to find out that people are playing like all the maligned instruments, the triangle, the accordion, like just, right, the ukulele or something, right?
Bagpipes.
And people going to hell are all like, oh my God, we're going to hell, until they find out it's a jazz club, right? They're just fucking happy. And
that was a great project because you said we have, 70-foot long wall or something. You wanted to do this history of jazz, and I wasn't a jazz aficionado beyond, passing, and I didn't know the history of jazz, and then that was a year or 2-year-long project, and watching all the Ken Burns and learning all about the history of jazz, and then we had to come up with, how to tell the story of jazz in the United States. And my whole thing, I kept thinking of, oh my God, it's going to be one of those horrible murals like you see at elementary schools where it's like Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King and their heads are like floating over children's dancing or something. And I'm like, how can we do the history of jazz? Because you knew that there's like 1,000 people in the history of jazz. And you're like, if you put 20 of them in, then everyone's going to be mad. Why didn't you put these 20 in? And why didn't you put these in? And I could just see that. And somehow, working together, we came up with the idea that rather than show people's heads or people playing jazz music, we said we could show the venues where jazz happened. And if you put in like the Savoy Room or something, then that represents the thousands of people that played there at that era of the 1930s or something. And so it became this whole cityscape of clubs going from New Orleans to St. Louis to Kansas City to Chicago to New York to San Francisco to LA. And it was such a great resolution of how to depict it. And then we had that idea and it became really great. And then you started putting, you got to put in the whites only drinking fountain. You got to put in the Emmett Till newspaper. You got to put into the...
Right, I remember that. Because again, back to negative space. Like I was filling up on that one. And you had done your research and you were like, all right, so Sandow was fantastic on this one in figuring out time and a kind of scape as it moves to these different places. So clearly jazz, I don't think it inarguably starts in New Orleans, so he has a second line. But we also follow like alcohol in there too. The remnants on the ground I put in were the first cocktail, right? The Sazerac is on the ground there if you bother to look. And so we followed that as well in terms of the timeline of how it traveled and how the music traveled, and of course clearly the black migration to the north as well. And so there was a point when there was too much fucking open space for my liking. And Sandow had figured out that the first taxi ever was actually Chicago. And you had figured, right? Do you remember that?
I don't remember. It's possible, yeah.
It's possible. It's like we're on film, so I don't recollect. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But anyway, I believe that that's the first cab. And so that symbolized the movement to the north. And people are sitting outside of a bus station, Greyhound bus, right? Somebody's got their axe, right? And so there was a space in between, and I was like, we need a newspaper, and we need a headline. And at that point, you're like, well, what is it? And I was like, well, to symbolize something that affected jazz in America in the North and the South, it needs to be the Emmett Till murder. And so we had a lot of that back and forth throughout the whole thing, aside from the marquees and things as it moved. And it's a good question of what exists when, why, and who gets to discuss and create monuments and stuff. But it was interesting to also put in the Bob Wills, Texas swing thing. And then working with, I think the San Francisco one, I was pretty adamant that we started with the Bloody Thursday riots, because San Francisco is the first city, and that's the first union, the dock workers union, to integrate. And so that's how people ended up coming here prior, actually, to World War II and that influx. And so then they wanted to hear their music, and so that's how jazz kind of came through the city. And so if you look in the turnaround there, it's the Bloody Thursday riots. We also wanted to end it up on a high note in a way, so it stops. I think the jazz in America stops just with Billie Holiday.
It ends in 1970s recording studio jazz, isn't it?
I think it's early 60s. It's Billie Holiday. Also, because at SF Jazz we end up every year playing "I'll Be Seeing You" in all the old familiar places by Billie Holiday. And in fact, you didn't know what song, remember we were talking about this? They didn't know what song to put as she's singing in the recording studio, and that came in later. You ended up putting I'll Be Seeing You later on. The only other thing that I think is kind of interesting to talk about this is that, so the other room with jazz in the afterlife, no problems, people loved it, except a bunch of jazz guys, especially older people. If you look to the side, there's a gentleman having a dream in a room, right? Mm-hmm. There's a musician, and there was a syringe in one of the titles near his bed, and a bunch of musicians came to me as a kind of point person that said, you know, if this is supposed to make us feel comfortable and this is our green room, we don't want to look at that shit. Whether you think it's part of our history, whether it's part of our history, we all lost motherfuckers, and no, like that's not cool. And I'm somebody clear, you know, should be clear. There's like for free speech and artists do whatever they want, but I called Sandow and I was like, hey, you're like, I don't know if you care if it's artistic merit, but like, could we come up with something else? And you were kind enough, and the Elise were kind enough to refire a tile. Anyway, but you changed.
So we took out the syringe and just wrote a book about him shooting heroin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Collaboration. So that was interesting. But there were a lot of back and forths that were really kind of probing and fun for me anyway. You know,
it was really fun because you know, in my normal practice, I guess. I hate using that word, but I'm not practicing being a painter. My normal time that I'm painting, I'm not practicing. I'm just home alone, and I'm just painting paintings for hours, listening to the radio, and then to do a project with Robert where he's like calling like twice a day and change this and change that, and then it's a whole conversation. It's a whole different way of working than normal for me, and it's exciting. It's fun.
I love it too. I mean, again, to be a part of Sandow's world and Elise's world it's super fun. I do not have that skill set, and it's unbelievable to have somebody bring in, you know, just a better vision of whatever you could do, and then to kind of work with it. It's super fun. I feel really unbelievably lucky that way.
And I did want to talk about the project I did here with Arion Press.
Oh yeah.
When they contacted me 3 or 4 years ago to do a book, and I had meetings with them, and they said, oh, you know, we want to do a book. And I said, I'm dying to do a book with you. I love the books you do. And they said, well, what book do you want to do? And every book I said had already been done by Arion Press. And then we were fishing around. I think there was some sort of, if I remember correctly, you had scheduled an artist to do something that had dropped out. So there was a little bit of urgency to do it rather quickly, if I remember correctly. And then you suggested, Arion Press suggested that we do Oscar Wilde's fairy tales, which was really, what do you call it, serendipitous, because very soon after, Elise and I were scheduled to go to Ireland to do a residence, so we were going to be in rural Ireland for a month doing an artist residency, and Oscar Wilde's from Ireland, and I said, oh, it's so great, I could do the images of his stories while I'm in Ireland, and that can make this great connection. So that was really nice, and then I actually went to Ireland and did all the images while in Ireland. So when he has a fairy tale about a fisherman, I knew very well what tiny little fishing harbors look like in County Mayo, and the little fishing boats that go out, and the little cottages that Irish fishermen live in. So it was really great that it all came about, the connection that I was in Ireland doing the project for Arion Press, and that was also a relatively quick turnaround for me. You know, normally I get an idea like to do the Quran, and I think about it for like 5 years, but this was like think about it for 1 month. It was really great because I could be in Ireland and do drawings on paper that were portable that I could bring back in the airplane, that they were relevant to the story, that I could read Irish fairy tales and walk around an Irish village the same day. So it was a really great project to do with Arion Press. So I was really grateful to do that.
Arion Press.